the phrase I heard you use this morning in an app was about softening into a part of your body that is that's painful in the moment of meditating because I don't know, your legs asleep, your back hurts. And I like that idea of softening into it, and not just in a meditative way of with something that's painful, but even just in life in a general way of sort of, if you're arguing with somebody, not assuming, to kind of soften into the argument that it actually changes the dynamic rather than, when you're arguing with somebody, you start to raise your voice because you think you're not being heard, and you match their level with a corresponding level, and it escalates, as opposed to kind of matching their level with softness, kind of going soft into it. It's kind of disarming to the other person. And I don't know if it's a strategy of winning an argument, but it's certainly, I think, a strategy of being more human.
Well, but it loops back to what you said before about listening. I mean, I think that what people most want in the world, when all is said and done, is to be met, to be seen, to be heard. So when you actually listen to somebody, especially somebody who you're inclined not to listen to because some part of your mind has already discounted what side they're on or what their perspective is, they feel met in a way that is totally disarming because it's so rare that you would actually encounter another human being who would see you anywhere near approximating who you really are, including the not knowing and the knowing that I know that you don't really know, but it's okay the way it is in this moment. And so that would be a moment of, I don't know what to call it, peace, reconciliation, even recognition of a common humanity. And that's like, we're so far from that in terms of the polarization in our society. But this is happening, I think, in families where even within a family, there's kind of been that separation where you lose touch with that possibility of just taking it in and taking in where it's coming from, which may be fear or, some kind of really view that is as toxic for the person that's holding it as it is for the person who's listening. And when you listen and hear with compassion, it is actually disarming. It has a kind of active element to it that might lead to a we instead of a me. I don't know, but I think, and then to come around to being a new father. I mean, in some sense, there you have that thing. I've always found, like, I love babies and I love the sort of purity of the connection and the simplicity, but also the mystery of the needs, and sometimes feeling inadequate about even meeting them or knowing what they are. But still, the love is like completely beyond anything that can be expressed in words,
Yeah.
and that it's changing constantly. So it's like not love like put in a box on a shelf, but an unfolding uh, mystery that is so reaffirming of the present moment and worth living that present moment to the next present moment, which winds up summing into a life, even if there is, coming out of a huge amount of loss and sorrow, and also what kind of a world we're sort of bequeathing to the coming generations. And I see this as a gigantic love affair, to tell you the truth, that the meditation practice and even formally taking your seat or lying down doing a body scan or anything like that, it's not just the kind of thing like going to the gym and working out and making sure that your doctors are happy that you're
Mm.
regulating your prefrontal cortex and, connecting it up with all sorts of other interesting areas in the brain, but that it actually is grounding us in a certain kind of meaningful way to meet the present moment in a way that allows us to live into the future. And, and not for ourselves, but for the children.
Do you, when you meditate, I mean, you've been doing it so long, uh, do you still find yourself losing, getting lost in, not getting lost, or following a thought down a rabbit hole and then having to bring yourself back?
Yeah,
Or
of course.
are
Of
you so
course.
involved that that doesn't happen?
I'm so glad you asked that question because, there's a very easy way to romanticize people who've been meditating a long time is like they don't have this problem anymore. They dealt with that long ago. It's in the nature of the mind to wave in the same way as it's in the nature of the ocean to wave. And it's not like, oh, if you become a really good meditator, then your ocean will always be flat, because depending on atmospheric conditions, the ocean can be incredibly tumultuous. But at the same time, the image or metaphor is that if you drop down into your belly or into your heart or under the surface for 20 or 30 meters, there's calm right now. There's clarity right now. The heart of Anderson Cooper, or is already here, already complete, already beautiful, and can't be improved upon, except when you fall into thinking and then you think, well, what's missing or stuff like that. But when you drop underneath the thinking, then whatever you're looking for or aspiring to is already here.
Mm.
So that's why the fundamental teaching of these meditative practices, that kind of non-dual invitation that there's no place to go, there's nothing to do. So it's not like you're strategizing how to shut down your thinking and have that great meditative experience that you've read about or always thought would be what it was. And there's no special something that you're trying to attain, but you're recognizing how incredibly special it is that the eyes work, the ears work, the nose works, the tongue works, the heart works, all without you doing anything. It's a gift. And then you have your child, love works. And it's like, whoa. And that's just this moment. So what if I live my way into this moment, even a tiny little bit, not as an ideal, but just by as fun, as play, then in some sense, the next moment makes itself even more available because we've been willing to be here for that one. So that's the way I practice, and that's the way I see it. So I don't give myself a hard time when I get lost in thought or stressed out or worried about how to go from the, sort of sheltering at home to being out there in the world, and how much distance I can have, and when to put on the mask, when to not put on the mask. What about my children coming from flying home from California? All of that kind of stuff is so much uncertainty in this moment that I think the best we can do is put out the welcome mat, acknowledge the uncertainty, and love what's here to be loved, including what's going on in the country at the level of the body politic and what you're reporting every single day, embracing it in such a way that it features what you were talking about, the woman in the Congo, that what's deepest and best and most beautiful and mysterious in us as human beings under conditions where, what frankly, an ordinary person would just throw up their hands and say, I'd kill myself,
Mm.
but no, what if instead of kill yourself, die now metaphorically to the small-minded narrative of I, me, and mine, and then open to a bigger we and see what happens. Because if you're going to die anyway, you might as well
Mm.
let the dying take care of itself and live the present moment, which is the only one we ever have. That's the way I practice, kind of.
It is one of the things that you read about in Michael Pollan's book, and also just talking to the doctors who are doing these Johns Hopkins experiments or trials. I talked to a woman who has very late stage cancer, and it doesn't have a great long term prognosis. And she took part in this study because she had crushing depression, end of life depression, and which is all rational that you would feel this way toward the end of life
Right.
when you know it. And her life, the like many of the people in these trials who have done large doses of Cybin, she had a really transformative experience. While she did it twice, it was the first time she really had this transformative experience, and it was very unpleasant while she was on it for a time because what she saw was so disturbing to her. But what by the end of it, and in the subsequent weeks as she thought about it, and it was really life changing and depression. The depression is not to the extent that it was. And what she came to is a phrase she heard while experiencing psilocybin, but it's become sort of her mantra, which is, as a phrase you mentioned earlier, right here, right now. And that, all the things that, everything else kind of, she saw herself she was able to see her life in a different way. And I think that's kind of an extraordinary thing, that you can get to a place to kind of realize the narrative that we have been telling ourselves. I wrote a memoir, and that narrative of like, what is I wrote about, is that really me? Or is that just a story I told myself? And I
And
know
you could have told it 100 different ways, right?
yeah, exactly, probably. All the things are true in it, so I'm not a
Right.
fabulist in that way, but I'm not, but
But you could have connected them differently. And
yeah, and am I beholden to that way of being? Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's just, a narrative I've become so used to thinking about myself in, and maybe there are other narratives and roads to wander down, and that's kind of exciting.
totally. The human mind and the human heart are so mysterious. No neuroscientist. I know you've interviewed a lot of neuroscientists. Next time, ask them what a thought is. No neuroscientist can actually say anything intelligible about sentience, what's called sentience or awareness, how you get uh, consciousness, wakefulness, and we're connecting even, we're looking at at laptop screens and we're seeing each other, but we're not just seeing the image of each other. There's a certain way in which in conversation we're resonating on some level that the technology is allowing, but it's not based on the technology. There's something incredibly mysteriously human about it.
Yeah.
It's like unbelievable. Well, nobody understands how the 3 pounds of meat in the head, as they say, or 86 billion neurons and 86 billion glial cells and thousands of trillions of synaptic connections that are changing all the time give rise to a sense of Anderson being on my screen and me being on Anderson's screen. And we're able to talk, not thinking that you're on the screen, but actually I'm feeling you right there sitting in your space. That's like we don't understand that. So I think it's really, for me, completely inspiring to realize how much we don't know and how much we don't even know we don't know about what it really means to be human. And that to me is my definition of spiritual, what it really means to be human, big question mark. So we don't need to fall into sort of parochial languaging around it, but to just like recognize that everything is in some sense an object of attention that could be actually an appreciation when held in awareness. Then we have multiple degrees of freedom in how we're going to relate to it, whether it's a leaf on a tree with the sunlight shining on it, or whether it's a baby. And to me, that's like reason enough to be optimistic about the future, is that when we take care of the present in this kind of a way, which is what I call living mindfully or heartfully or consciously, the next moment's already different, isn't it? Because we've shown up in this one in a way that's not just the narrative. The narrative's fine, but it's not the whole story.
Well, also with the psilocybin descriptions, um, you know, people describe looking at trees, and the trees are different. They're alive in a
Yeah.
way, and communicating with the other trees and the grass. And um, how does one know that's not actually the way it actually is? Like
It is actually the way it
right.
is,
I mean,
because everything's connected with everything else.
yes, but but even the way one is seeing it in that experience, maybe that is the way it's supposed to be seen, and it's the other times that you're just not seeing it fully.
We eradicated all of the cultures on this continent that saw the world that way and lived in a world that was that way,
Mm,
called Native American cultures.
mm,
Uh, the sacred hoops of the Lakota, the Black Elk speaks. That was the way they understood the world. The Aborigines in Australia, the same thing. Walking on the land, the outback, the rocks are alive, the earth itself is alive, and it has elements of living place that a white person just like not part of their, sort of mental framework. But that's in some sense our loss.
Mm.
And we kind of course, completely eradicated that whole way of seeing the world, which actually was like the way of seeing the world for 60 or 80,000 years before we developed agriculture,
Mm.
never mind cities.
Mm.
So our precocity has been, I think, doing stuff to our heads, but we're still so immature as a species that we haven't like come to the fullness of these different ways of seeing and knowing. And for me, what the meditation practice does is, I don't need 60,000 years to drop into that domain. All I need to do is get out of my own way by letting the thoughts come and go, as opposed to being completely captured and carried downstream by them. And it's an exercise, it's like the mind goes off, you bring it back, mind goes off, you bring it back, goes off this way, you bring it back. And then sometimes the mind just kind of naturally, just like water, it just stills itself for a time. And it's all awareness. It's just pure awareness, which, we started out with, none of the neuroscientists really understand what that is.
How much do you meditate a day now? I mean, I guess.
When I used to be asked that question a lot, and I would answer like as follows. Well, I'll do maybe 45 minutes of mindful yoga in the morning, and then I'll sit for another half hour or 45 minutes. I no longer answer that way because uh, I heard what you said at the very beginning about, sort of just trying to meditate in the car, going from one venue to another and not using your phone and stuff like that. And then saying that that may not feel adequate. You need to really ground it in a daily practice that's significant by the clock or something like that. And I would say for the first 25 or 30 years of my own meditation practice that I just answered that way and it felt like I was
Mm.
answering the question. When I'm asked that question now by reporters, I can't answer that way anymore because it really doesn't feel authentic. It's more, I think, accurate to say, to the degree that it's possible, my whole life is the meditation practice, including the times when I'm mindless, for long stretches of time. Because as soon as I recognize that I'm mindless, I'm not mindless anymore. I'm back in the present moment, and that's something that goes on 24/7. So then life itself becomes not only the practice, but in some sense, the curriculum and everything that arises, the good, the bad, the ugly, what I call after Zorba, the full catastrophe of the human condition. That's the curriculum. That's the invitation. And then the challenge is how to be in wise relationship to it. So stillness is good, but then you can't always be still. You got to get up and move. So you could do running meditation. You can do uh, broadcasting on CNN from your home meditation, nightly news, that it's all part of the
Mm.
unfolding. And I, sort of like people can feel when you're fully present through the screen. I can feel it, and it's beautiful because there's something else that's being transmitted besides the news, and that is like and I'm not saying this, to sort of praise you, but I think that when somebody is caring about this dimension of things, you can't not carry it into uh, delivering the news in such a way that it's embodied, it's personified by you. We have a lot of choices on, who we're going to watch on the news, and every single one of those people is to some degree or other embodying it, and we can sort of select who we feel actually copacetic with, where we're receiving something that's more than just the very often bad news
Mm.
commentary,
I do think
something
that,
deeper.
yeah, I do think that's one of the exciting things about television is that, I mean, as you said earlier, it does transmit truths and in terms of and connection that there is this strange connection you can have with through the television screen, and
It's
it's through
intimacy.
through this little camera at the top of our screen, and um, yeah, it's the intimacy of it that I love. Actually, it's a thing that, because for me, when I started and out in places where generally something terrible was happening, um, and I believe very strongly in bearing witness and wanting to kind of bring people who weren't there to that spot and see what it's like and smell it, and
Yep.
um, and while some stories maybe are better as print stories, television can bring you to a place, and a physical place that's also a very emotional place, and you can kind of, when it's done right, and with a combination of words and pictures and silences, it can transmit an awful lot.
And I've watched you often enough in war zones in the past where something else is transmitted, and it's presence isn't exactly the right word, but presence includes is what I'm trying to get to, and that is, in some sense, your heart is interfacing with the calamity that you're reporting on, whatever it is.
Mm,
And through your heart, our hearts are in some sense moved. And that's fundamental to humanity. So I've, sense that by playing that kind of role, you're actually serving as a kind of conduit of caring and compassion and insight into the the magnitude of not only suffering, but the magnitude of human dignity in a certain way. And we can't all be there. So, that kind of a job, and I would call that a meditative function in a very real way, because your embodied presence is what does all the work.
mm,
And it may seem that's not what does the work, because that part's effortless. But a lot of people never have sustained experiences of embodied presence.
mm,
And it's not an act. It's not like you're doing it for anybody else, is that you can't help doing it because that's who you are.
mm.
And that's beyond, I would say. I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions here because I
Oh,
don't actually know you very well, but just gleaning, and then making it up as I go along. Uh, that's that's the beauty of your métier, so to speak, is that beyond whatever the job description is, there's the embodied witnessing and transmission of something that's has gravitas, that's dignified even, and sometimes the horror of it, and that doesn't just inform, but it, in some sense, elevates and moves.
mm,
And then, of course, that's just like your job. But could we all, in some sense, be more grounded and more embodied in the way we relate to life? And then the meditation practice becomes coextensive with life, and you still get your butt on the cushion regularly for long stretches of time, longer than you actually feel comfortable with,
right.
because there's this paradox that some things will actually, by practicing non-doing and not wanting to have anything change or not pursuing any kind of end result, you're actually, at the level of the brain, at the level of your genome, at the level of your telomeres, at all sorts of biological and social levels. By practicing non-doing, things are actually transforming.
Mm.
And there's some element of mystery that we're just beginning to sort of recognize, never mind understand. But that's part of the love affair as far as I'm concerned. And I love that we can have this kind of conversation about it too, because um, I mean, all of us are, in a sense, in our infancy in terms of growing into what it really means to be human. And I see it as a fantastic, yeah, as I said, love affair, but also a kind of an adventure, and also an adventure in friendship, in a friendship that goes beyond the usual platitudes of friendship, but some kind of deep connection that is very often beyond time and space,
Mm.
just the way it is on the screen like this, but is very much in time and space with you and Wyatt, for instance, or me
Mm.
with my children or grandchildren, uh, when we can be in analog physical presence, which luckily I'm able to do during this,
I think
sheltering
that
at home.
that is something I am working on, trying to be more fully human and not just somebody that is focused on work, but experiencing the range of human emotions, and both for better and for worse, and as painful as they can be. But it's what Stephen Colbert talked about: living the most human life possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Happiness is not always attainable, but even if one is not happy, if you're more fully human, then that is something, and that's something.
And maybe happiness that, we haven't really been too good at defining what happiness really is. Maybe it's kind of coming to terms with things as they are in a way that allows for a profound equanimity, a profound contentment. Happiness might not be like la la, or whatever our cliched view of happiness is, but but just a boundless gift of open-heartedness,
Mm,
boundless though, that is both mysterious and full of emotion.
mm. Well, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah,
I
thank you
mean,
so much.
we hardly ever get to talk, but
Oh,
I
nice.
do feel, I mean, I do see you on the screen from time to time, but I do feel a kind of uh, deep connection, I want to say,
Yeah,
that
I hope
goes
so.
really beyond time and space, Anderson. And I just, I carry you in my heart, and I really wish you well. I mean, it really, wish isn't probably the best word, but it's sort of, I just, I love how adventurous you
Mm. Well, thank you. I've learned a lot already from you, and
are.
more to come.
Well, and I from you too.
I doubt that, but thank you.
All right. Thank you again,
Thanks,
Anderson.
guys.
I
All
will
right.
send you the link if you want to meditate with us for
Yeah,
about
please do.
20 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
have a good rest of your day,
I will.
and give Wyatt a little bow from me,
All
okay,
right. I
from
definitely will.
us,
All right.
okay.
All right.
Take
Thanks.
care.
Bye bye.